So you could also have an occasion where elements are not chemically bonded together, but instead they're just mixed together. So if you imagine if you mix different types of sand together, you don't end up creating a new bit of sand. What just ends up happening is you mix these types of sands together. You haven't formed a new compound. And this is exactly the same for chemicals. When you mix elements together or compounds together and they don't chemically combine, we term this a mixture. So this is what we call a mixture. Now, before we spoke about what happens when you want to separate compounds out into their constituent elements. So you might combine two elements in a chemical reaction and form this compound. And to go the other way, it's also going to be a chemical reaction. But when you have a mixture like this, you don't need a chemical reaction to actually separate it because they're not chemically bonded together. So instead you use what we call physical processes. So the alternative to a chemical reaction essentially is a physical process. So a physical process can be used to actually separate these out. And we'll look at physical processes in more detail, but you do need to know a few examples. And so, for example, you could use filtration, you could use crystallization, simple distillation or fractional distillation, or even chromatography. And don't worry too much if you're not too aware of what these actually are. We haven't covered these yet, but we will do in future videos. But what you should know is that all of these are examples of physical processes. There's no chemical reactions involved here. You're not creating any new substances. You're just separating out these existing substances that are already there. Okay, so because this is a mixture, and what we can say that all of these individual atoms or elements or compounds have unchanged chemical properties. So it's only when you actually have a chemical reaction and you create a new substance that you'll end up with new chemical properties in that new substance. So whenever you have just a physical mixture like this, the chemical properties of each individual element or atom or compound are not actually affected. And like we said, this is how you would separate it. Okay, so let's do some questions now. Okay, quite a short quiz today because we didn't cover too much. So true or false, mixing is a chemical process. Well, mixing is actually not a chemical process, it's a physical process. Part B, the chemical properties of substances can be changed by mixing them together with other substances. Well, actually, no, if you want to change the chemical property of a substance, you need to react it in a chemical reaction to form a new substance. And if you just mix it together, you're not actually changing the chemical properties. And the last question, separating elements in a compound can be done by filtration. Again, this is false. All three are false. Filtration is an example of a physical process, and so cannot be used to actually separate compounds out. If you want to separate a compound out, then that needs to be done via a chemical reaction, as we mentioned in the previous video. Okay, so hopefully you got those correct. It wasn't too much in this video, and we'll go through these processes in a lot more detail later on, but this is just a good overview of what you need to know regarding mixtures.